Well, hello, friends. Ari, the Rusty Pilot here, and I was given a homework assignment. If you remember, my last flight didn't quite turn into a flight. There was some weather issues, but we still had a really good time on the ground. Me and my CFI Grant, we talked about some of the club rules for the place that I'm going to be flying, and we went and sat in the airplane for a little while, and it was really productive. I was pretty negative there, but I was disappointed that I didn't get up to go up in the air, but it was really productive, and he did give me a homework assignment so that we can get the ground portion of the BFR out of the way on my next visit to the flight school, which is tomorrow. It's Monday the 13th right now. Tomorrow's the 14th. I'm going to be back there at Rainier Flight Service to do the ground portion of my VFR. And if you look through the FAA's advisory circular on what's supposed to be included, one of those things is flight planning. We're supposed to do a cross-country flight plan, and so I did it. He gave me a homework assignment. He didn't really give me a lot of direction, which I guess I shouldn't have been expecting much. I should just know how to do those things, and it took me a second to kind of remember. Oh yeah. Now I remember how to do a flight plan. So all he said was, we're going to take off out of Renton, and we're going to go down to Hillsboro. And he told me how much he weighs, and I was like, oh right, weight and balance. Got to do weight and balance too. So, any case, I put together a flight plan. And I'm going to talk through all this stuff. So what is included in a flight plan? Now, remember, I haven't flown in 8.5 years, and I haven't had to do a flight plan like this in longer than that. So I'm not totally sure that I got everything done, but here's what I included in mine. First, I did a weight and balance, and so airplanes are only certified up to a certain weight, and you got to make sure that the center of gravity isn't too far forward or too far back, and so I did a weight and balance. And then I also put together a route plan. I'm going to fly from here to there, and I'm going to talk you through how I did that. I had to look at the weather and the performance of the airplane to make sure that the airplane would be able to fly, because it's VFR, so I can't fly through clouds on this. It's got to be VFR only, so do I have enough cloud clearance? And then how long is it going to take me to get there, and fuel usage and all that stuff. So I worked through all of that. Now, my best understanding of the flight plan comes from a really specific rule. Now, if you look at the FAR, and again, glare issues, but I hope you kind of get the idea. I put the FAR on my iPad so that I've always got access to it. But if you look at the FAR, it's 91.103. It says each quote, this is a quote directly from the FAR, each pilot in command shall, before beginning a flight, become familiar with all available information concerning that flight. Each pilot in command. If you're the one flying in the airplane, if you're the one in charge, before you take off, before you go anywhere, you need to become familiar with all available information concerning the flight. Where you start, where you go, runway lengths, frequencies, weather, weight and balance, everything that might affect that flight. Under normal, obviously emergencies is going to be something totally different, but you need to be aware of everything about the flight before you take off. So that's kind of where a VFR flight plan, and really any flight plan, is rooted. So I had to make a couple decisions. When am I going to go? And I really just picked a day and time out of the blue. I kind of I looked up in the sky and said, oh, the weather is pretty good, and went from there. So in Renton on March 12th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was working on this flight plan at about 12:30 on the 12th, which is Sunday. It was a Sunday. And so I said, okay, well, if I'm working on about 12:30, that's close enough to a go time of 2 p.m. that's going to work for me. And I realized as I started this process that technology can make this really easy. I mean, you can really take some really big shortcuts that are totally okay. But I didn't really feel good about that. I didn't feel good about letting the technology do a lot of the work for me. Now, I did let the technology do some of the work for me. There's ForeFlight and there's Flight Plan, and I still owe you a video on how I feel about the technology in the cockpit in general. But those two pieces, as just a starting point, it makes it really easy to do a flight plan and to kind of get yourself up in the air. And so, yeah, I did want to use that, but I also wanted to do it the old school way. I wanted to get a pen and paper out and actually write all this stuff down. So I went through both of those processes. Okay. So the first step for me was the weight and balance. Now, I made a pretty big mistake when I was doing my initial weight and balance calculations. If you look in the POH, the Pilot Operating Handbook, it's one of the documents that's required in an airplane. The POH, you can usually buy them for different airplanes, and they're kind of like this general guide. And then you need to use the one that's actually in the airplane. Now, Rainier Flight Service, my flight school, has a document online that has all the important stuff listed. And I started off doing my weight and balance just using the generic numbers for the Cessna 172 SP model. Big mistake. It turned out that the generic numbers were like totally fake. They're not real at all. And so it gives you a center of gravity that's like all out of whack. Even with a single pilot, even with no fuel, the weight and balance totally off. So my first big lesson there is look at the actual performance document for the airplane that you're going to fly, not one like it, but the one that you're actually going to fly, and either look at the POH or find someone that has knowledge of what it says in the POH for the center of gravity. And then I started to go through my trip plan. So the first thing I did is I looked at the origin, which was KRNT, and the destination KHIO, and I started looking at as much information as I could take in. So I looked at the current weather in both places. I looked at the TAF, the forecast. It's a kind of this rolling every 6 hours comes out, new weather. I looked at any NOTAMs, notices to airmen, that would be concerning, like if a runway is going to be closed, or if there's an object that I might hit that's close to the airport that's not really well lit, or anything like that. Any notices to airmen, I had to look at all that stuff. I also looked for any TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, that might be in effect that could affect my range of flight. I started to look in the AFD, and that's one of the places that I cheated. I don't have a chart supplement on my iPad, but I do have ForeFlight, and so I was able to look at the actual FAA AFD or supplement for those airports and look at things like the frequencies and whether they're towered, and ground control and weather services, all the frequencies that I would need access to. I also looked at runway information. How long is the runway? How wide is the runway? And any other services that were available. Is there fuel? Is there a restaurant? I mean, are there rental cars? Not that I would need any of that stuff, but I wanted to look, and I wanted to see what was available. And then I pulled out a chart, and that was the second place that I cheated. I started just by drawing a straight line virtually on using ForeFlight. I drew a straight line from Renton to Hillsboro outside of Portland. I just drew a straight line, and then I said, okay, now how does that line look? Looking at airways that might be available, or are there some unique terrain things that I could look for? Do I have will I have enough cloud clearance? I mean, I looked at everything that I could along that straight line, and then I said that straight line's a little wonky because I've got Class B airspace, Class Bravo airspace for Seattle Tacoma International, KSEA, that I have to worry about. I have a military base that's not too far from there that has some restricted airspace and some MOAs and some other special use airspace that I had to worry about. There is a big mountain called Mount St. Helens that you might have heard about if you've been alive since before 1980. Big volcano that blew up, and there's still kind of some special land stuff around that, so I needed to stay out of that way. And then by the time I get down to Portland, I have to worry about their airspace also. Now, they're not a Class B airspace. They're a Class C airport. So at least I've got that going for me. It's not quite as restrictive, but it's still, there's big airplanes going in and out of there, and I had to be aware of that. Plus, there's a lot of just big open land. And I don't, if something were to happen mid-flight, I don't want to be in some backcountry area. So I wanted to stay kind of in relatively populated places. I needed to take all those airway considerations. And yeah, I did use ForeFlight to make that initial, and then I refined the route a little bit. I picked a couple points along the route that would keep me out of the special airspace and would put me on as many airways as possible. So clearly defined waypoints, looking at altitudes, and it turned out it wasn't that different. When I just drew a straight line from Renton to Hillsboro, the initial line was 121 nautical miles. 121 miles. Once I kind of shifted it a little bit, it was 126 nautical miles. So by making myself a little bit safer, staying out of Class B airspace, staying out of military areas, making sure I was overpopulated areas in case something happens, all those things, I only lost five nautical miles, and I calculated my true airspeed along the route to be roughly 110 knots. So that difference is less than 5 minutes. Not bad. I'll take that. Okay, so what's my route? How would I fly this? I don't think we're actually going to fly it. I mean, it's a kind of a long route, and flight time's expensive. So what would the route be? Well, of course, we're going to start out of Renton. And the first waypoint, the first stop that I would hit is Orton, Ortin, which is just a... It's kind of this virtual place on a map, but there's a couple different ways that I can notice it when I'm in the airplane. Now, because I was instrument rated, I know how to use VORs pretty well. But even as a VFR pilot, you have to make sure that you know how to use VORs also. And so the Ortin, Ortin, Oscar Romeo Tango India November, it is the, intersection of the SEA and TCM VORs. It's where those where certain radials coming off of those, I guess there's a lot of intersections, but where two specific radials intersect. It's south of Lake Tapps, which is a pretty visible landmark. It's almost due east of another airport called Pierce County Thun Airport, which is popular in this area. If you go to the Northwest Aviation Show in Puyallup, that's where a lot of people will fly in and out of. And it's approximately 19 miles off the Seattle 144 radial. There's no DME marking. I even looked at the IFR charts and I couldn't find a DME marking. But that does keep me out of the Class B airspace, and it allows me to climb to a little bit higher, a little bit earlier than I would have if I had just followed the straight line. From there, I make a right turn, and I go to the Alder intersection, Alpha Lima Delta Echo Romeo, and that is where Victor 495, the Victor Airway 495, and Victor 204 intersect. It's the Seattle 168 radial at about 37 DME, and it's the Battleground 345 radial. That intersects me to Victor 495. That's how I get onto an airway. Now, I'm still kind of in greater Seattle at that point, but at least now I'm going to be west of more of the mountains, like Mount St. Helens that I talked about. Up until Alder, I'm still a little bit out of the way, but I still am overpopulated area, so I'm totally good with that. Now, the airway, Victor 495, is the longest leg. If I look at my flight plan, I've got legs that are 22, 21, 20, 14 miles, and then this one, which is 48. Now, Victor Airways are how the FAA and air traffic controls likes you to fly between 2 points. They want you to stay on these Victor Airways, and then they know how to look for you, and that's where most of the traffic is, and they can adjust IFR traffic easier, and it's good to be on Victor Airways when you can. So for the longest leg, 48 nautical miles, I'm on Victor 495. And by the time I get 48 miles further down the trip, now I'm starting to get closer to PDX, and I had to start thinking about that. And so I decided to make another right turn and go to Scappoose, KSPB, Sierra Papa Bravo. I was like, P, right. I got to remember my phonetic alphabet better. Sierra Papa Bravo. And then from there, it's just a short 12-mile jump down to Hillsboro. Hotel India Oscar. Right, okay, so now I have my route worked out, 126 nautical miles, and then from there, I start looking at weather. Again, I had to look at weather at the origin, at Renton, and make sure that that's going to be VFR conditions, so I'll be able to take off and see, and that's all good. And then I wanted to look at my destination airport. Now, when I looked at the destination in the forecast, I wanted to look for my planned time that I was going to land plus 2 hours. I wanted to make sure that the weather was going to be okay from the time I was scheduled or planning to land 2 hours after that. So in case anything happens, maybe I want to make a stop and get a bite to eat or need to use the bathroom, or who knows what it could be. Maybe I just get delayed before taking off. And I wanted to make sure that I thought 2 hours for a flight that's only going to be an hour and change anyway. I thought 2 hours was going to be enough time. That's a decision that I made. And then I also wanted to look at weather along the route. Now, that's not just the weather in the sky, which you look at from something called winds aloft, and then temperature. But I also wanted to look at a couple airports that were along that route and see what the weather was going to be like at those airports as I traveled, because that's going to give me a pretty good indication. And then, I also needed to look at the winds aloft. Now, that's where we get into this funny thing, right? If you have done any flight training, you might have seen one of these. And there's a lot of great videos on the internet on how to use this thing. It's called an E6B. And I don't know why it's called an E6B. The number doesn't make any sense to me. But it's basically this two-part thing, right? It comes apart into these two pieces. And this is how you can make a whole bunch of flight calculations. How much fuel are you going to use in a given time? What is the Fahrenheit to Celsius conversion? What's the calibrated to true airspeed conversion? And pressure, altitude, and all these different things. But then on the back, you can you can figure out wind correction angles. Because if you're going this way, and the wind is coming from this way, you want to keep going this way, you turn this way. And then the wind is pushing you this way, and so you kind of go like this. Instead of flying like this, you fly like this, because the wind is pushing you there. And so you can use this thing to do that. But that also slows you down just a little bit. And so using wind correction angles can change the amount of time that it takes you. But I had to look at all that. And then I also, because of that slowdown in time, I had to look at my fuel consumption. Now, the Cessna 172 carries 53 gallons. And at 2,300 RPM, which is my plan, I'm going to be burning, excuse me, I'm going to be burning about 9 gallons per hour. Total flight time, I calculated at 1 hour and 17 minutes. 53, let's just round that up and say 15 gallons. I've still got plenty in reserve. I could get down there, turn around, and come back and still not have to refuel. Now, the FAA says for VFR flight, you need to have a minimum of 30 minutes in reserve after your scheduled landing. For IFR flight, it needs to be a minimum of 45, or at least that's what's current. I need to check that with my CFI, but pretty sure those are still the current numbers. But I've got that more than covered. Down, all the way down, all the way back, no problem. Now, I will say, as I was doing these calculations, I was really conservative with my fuel burn. I wanted to make sure that I had plenty and that I was rounding up all the time, because there's three things that that a pilot doesn't care about: runway behind you, altitude above you, and fuel still in the fuel truck on the ground. None of those things help you. Runway behind you, altitude above you, and fuel still in the fuel truck. So I wanted to make sure that I was rounding up and I was being as conservative as possible, because it's not a brand new airplane, and so performance may have gone down a little bit. Any case, so I ran all that, and I wrote it all down on this thing, which is I got this, I'm pretty sure, as part of an IFR training kit. This one is marked ASA. Which is the company that made this. It came in like a big pad, but I don't know. I might have got it as part of like some sort of a training kit. But it came in really useful for this exercise. because just right down the middle, you can mark all the waypoints that you're planning to visit, and then you can mark what the predicted winds are, and the temperature, and your airspeed, and then you can calculate all of your distances and all of your speeds. And this flight planner was really, really, really good to use. And then on the back, you can mark your weather briefing, and then mark down your winds aloft, so you've got a quick reference to it, and then you can do your weight and balance calculations down at the bottom too. So this thing came in really useful, and then I wanted to do it on the computer too. I wanted to see how close I got. I wanted to see were my calculations close to what computer said. The actual flight time and the actual fuel burn and wind correction angles and all that stuff. My weight and balance came out exactly the same. That's an easy one, so I'm not that. I mean, okay, that's nice, but I'm not like totally stoked about that. It's cool that, you know, oh yeah, okay, I did it right, cool. The route and the time came out a little bit different. There was about an 8-minute difference. And I was thinking about this. Now, the computer said it would take me about 8 minutes longer to get down there than I said. And I was thinking about that, and I realized, well, one of the things the computer is doing is it's assuming that I can climb, because I haven't learned how to use ForeFlight completely yet. And so that route, or that climb, that initial climb, I punched in 7,500 as my altitude. And I think the computer... I think that it was assuming that I was going to climb straight to 7,500. But like I said, there's a lot of weird altitude restrictions around here, either because of military operations or because of the Seattle Class B airspace or whatever. And so I had to kind of stay low, and then I climb, and then I climb again. So it takes me a while to get there, but that means I can get a lot of the distance out of the way at lower airspeeds before I start climbing higher. So that might have been one of those things. And I think as I learn how to use ForeFlight a little bit more, I think that'll get get closer and closer, more and more accurate. Overall, I'm really happy that I was able to get through the whole process without too much hassle. I even sent an email to my flight instructor. Was like, why is my weight and balance so far off? And then I realized my mistake before he got back to me, and so I'm happy about that. And I'm gonna go down to the airport tomorrow, and I'm gonna go over all this, and we're gonna go over all the regs and all the stuff that the advisory circular says to do during the ground portion of the VFR. And then hopefully I'll schedule a flight sometime after that. I mean, we just had daylight savings time kick in, and it's starting to get warmer around these parts, and so hopefully that means clearer at some point real soon also. And the options for flying are going to be more and more and more and more, and that's really good news for me. And you know I'm going to take you along with you. If you're a flight instructor or you work for the FAA or whatever, maybe you're a pilot that's got 20 years and 20,000 hours under your belt. If I missed something, if you heard something, you're like, that's just wrong, please let me know. I'm trying to get all this right, but I'm human and I haven't flown in 8.5 years. I'm a rusty pilot. So thanks for watching. Let me know down in the comments, subscribe, like, all the things, and I'll see you next time.